Hi, welcome back to the channel. This week I'm feeling inspired by infected mushroom, so I want to create a infected style bassline using Filterverse. And I should emphasize this is just an inspired by, it's not a one-for-one recreation or anything like that. So without any further ado, let's get started. So here in the MIDI I have just a series of 16ths, as you can see here. So first up, obviously we need to choose our oscillator, make it to saw, and if we now turn the audio up, you can start to hear the output. But before we do that, let's turn on a ADSR, turn the sustain up, and then we're going to attach that to the audio level. So now we can't hear anything until we press the transport. There we go. Let's just solo the bass. Perfect. Seems a bit too loud. Let's just turn down a bit. Like so. And I think we're 2 octaves too high, so let's take this down to -24. Now the next thing I'm going to do is change the filter routing to be this one here at the end. So essentially we have filter types 1 and 2 running in series and then 3 running in parallel. Or to rephrase, 1 and 2 are working together simultaneously and then filter type 3 is working independently. So let's turn 1 off for now, we're not using it, and then we'll turn 3 on. Let's turn that down and then we're going to add another ADSR, turn the sustain down, and we'll attach that to the filter cutoff ADSR here. Let's turn this up an octave. Let's change our filter type to bread and butter, and then we'll choose 3 poles, which is a slope of 18 dB. So we have the basic foundations of a bass already, and obviously that would work quite well in the majority of psi genres, but I want to make it a bit more groovy and a bit more infected, as I said. So let's add now a metanob, and then what I want to achieve with the metanob is I want to set it up so that velocity will drive a different response to the filter. So to that end, let's create another MIDI. Just have this one playing now, and let's just loop that so we have only half a bar playing, and I'm going to turn down the velocity on the first 3, like so. So for the first half of the bar, we have low velocity. It doesn't matter exactly what that value is, so long as it's less than 50%, and that in MIDI terms is 64. And for the second half of the bar, we are above 50%. So we have as a default 100. Once again, doesn't matter what the value is, so long as it's above 64. So just to say once again, below 64, above 64. Let's go back to our Filterverse patch, and on the metanob, we're going to select switch 2. Now velocity is a unipolar modulation, so that means that the metanob needs to be set up accordingly. And then we're going to set the starting point to 50. And then obviously we need to feed that with velocity. So let's add a MIDI, turn on velocity. And then here under the metanob, we will control that by velocity as I said. So MIDI 5 here. So now when I play this back, for the first half, we're going to be in the lower range of the metanob. And for the second half, we're going to be in the upper range of the metanob. So watch this flip left to right. You also can't hear anything for the first half of the bar. That's because I have velocity sensitivity on the 2 ADSRs. So let's turn that down to 0. So now we can still hear the full bar, but once again, you can see that it flips from minus 50% to above 50% for the first half and then second half of the bar respectively. So why is that exciting, I hear you ask? Well, now let's turn filter type 3 off, so we only have 1 and 2 playing, and we're going to set them up with 2, let's turn them on, and I'm going to set them up with 2 very distinct filter types. It doesn't matter what they are, they just need to be different so I can demonstrate the point. Well, let's turn 2 off for now, so now we're just playing the vowel. So I think that's distinctive enough. And let's go to fractaser. Let's turn that one on and vowel off. So once again, a distinctive sound, distinct to the vowel. So now let's move over to the fractaser, and I'll start with that one because that's the easiest to explain. So let's turn down the filter output, and then we're going to modulate that with the metanob. So let's turn that up. So now when I play this back, you can hear that for the second half, when the velocity is above 50%, it triggers this half of the metanob, which in turn triggers the output of the fractaser. So let's now do the inverse for the vowel. Let's turn fractaser off. For now, I'll turn it back on in a sec. And now this one is a little bit more complicated to explain, but I'll try my best. So because we're going to be in the negative part of the modulation, we need to in turn modulate this with a negative amount on the meta knob. So let's turn this down. And as you can see, when I turn it down, the depth goes up. And that's because we have a negative here and a negative there. Two negatives make a positive. So you can hear for the first half, we have the depth of the vowel increasing for the first half of the bar. So now if I turn fractaser on, we should get vowel for the first half and fractaser for the second half. And as you can hear, that is not happening. And the reason for that is because at the start, I changed this filter routing. So let's change it to this one here. And now when I play it back, you should get exactly as I explained. First it does the vowel, then it does the fractaser. So the point of that was just a little demonstration just to show how this meta knob works when set to switch mode, how you can flick between essentially two different states using the velocity. So now that I've hopefully explained that, let's put this filter configuration back to how it was. We always needed the one I chose at the start, but I just wanted to demonstrate that concept to you because that will be used in a moment. So let's turn fractaser off for now. And for the filter type, we're going to choose bread and butter. Or even better, let's go to bread and butter here, and then we'll drag that across to modulation slot 1. So essentially we've copied that. So now we have slots 1 and 2 identical to each other. So once again, let's reapply that concept. Let's turn filter output down. We'll modulate that with a negative amount on the meta. So let's go minus 75. And then on the bread and butter, let's do the same, but then we'll modulate that on the meta once again with a positive 75. So if you're following along, you know that for the first half, we will get filter type 1, and then for the second half, we'll get filter type 2. So now when we play this back, it should sound exactly the same until we start to modulate each of the filters. So now for the first half, we're playing this bandpass, and then the second half, we're playing this low pass. And that is controlled by velocity. So let's turn this middle one up. So now you can see we can draw in some patterns there to get a bit of a variation. So we're getting somewhere. Let's turn the resonance back down. That was just for demonstration. Let's turn it down to a low pass once again, and then the cutoff all the way down. So basically we're back to where we started. So now I want to draw in a pattern. Let's move these ones across. We want the straight 16ths to be at the start. We'll move this across to a full bar. And then we're just going to draw something in for demonstration purposes. I want a long one there. And then completely random, doesn't matter. Once again, this is just for demonstration. But the critical thing is on these longer notes, let's turn the velocity down to less than 50%. So now let's add a sequencer. Let's turn this to 1/4 because the longest long note that we have, if that makes sense, is basically 1/8. So 1/4 should work. We can always revisit that. And for pattern, I think it's number 20 is the one I want, which is a ramp up. Perfect. Currently this modulation is on this ADSR, the little plucky one. So let's take that off and instead we'll assign that to the sequencer. Resonance down, also back down to low pass. So now you can hear the short notes play the little plucky traditional bass, and then the longer notes play the sweep up of the cutoff. Let's also maybe assign this sequencer to the type. Let's change it to a 1 so it moves up to the bandpass. And now what we can do is make use of this routing that we set up at the start. So let's add a fractaser. And now we will have, let's turn off this modulation that we had earlier and turn the depth up. So now you can hear we have the longer bassline notes also going into fractaser. But that was just an example. So let's change this to coils. So that sounds okay as an additional kind of layer to the sound. Let's give a bit of modulation to that. But I don't want it to be all the time because I still want it to be a bass and it's not sounding like a bass anymore. So let's add a sequencer. Let's change this to one of the square types, put it on unipolar, and turn this all the way down. And then we'll attach this to the dry wet. So sequencer 3, then turn down the original state. So now we have where we modulate. As you can see, the sequencer is going up. So that's sounding quite good. I think it's too regular. Let's change this to, let's go 3, and then we'll draw in a little pattern. So there we go. So it's not as consistent as it was before. Let's move that one across to the left. And what I don't like is the ramp up on the modulation. So let's take that off, and instead we're going to add a random. And instead we'll use the random to control the depth, which is now random here. Let's turn the rate down to something like 1/2 and the glide up a little bit. So I think we're getting there. It's almost there. So I've just created a MIDI pattern. So let's play that back with that pattern and also with a kick and snare. Okay, that's getting there, but let's take it one step further, I think. I'm going extra experimental. So let's copy this one, Filterverse. We're going to copy this to the return track and paste that down there. Let's obviously turn up our send. Now let's add a MIDI track here, and then let's receive the MIDI from track 1, the bass, and then we're going to send that to the send Filterverse version. So Filterverse A. Click on monitor in. And now this is, as you can see here, Filterverse A up here. This is receiving MIDI from the bass MIDI. As you can see here. So let's turn off our oscillator. We don't need that. We can also turn off our ADSRs because they belong to the oscillator. We're going to keep the meta activated. Let's turn off coils and bread and butter. So now we only have the first bread and butter playing. And let's change that to a tempong, like so. Change it 1/8 and then 1/8 dotted. And then what we're going to do is, let's take off the modulation here, and we'll assign this modulation to the filter input as a negative. Let's go -75. Now remember, this meta knob on the negative part is being triggered when it receives one of those longer MIDI notes. So you can see here now, on the longer ones, it's only triggering on the longer notes. We have some modulation here. Let's turn that off. We don't want that. Turn down the depth or the feedback. Let's take off the sequencer. We don't need that. And then we'll attach the random to the dry wet. But let's turn this down to 50%. We always want there to be something. And then we'll attach the modulation depth. It only needs to be 50 because it only needs to go half more of the way, if that makes sense. It's already starting at 50, so then it goes 50 more. Let's change this to unipolar so it doesn't go below that. And then we'll maybe change the rate, something a bit slower, 1/2. And then let's see what we have now. Maybe it's a bit too much. And then final thing, let's add another Filterverse. Well, let's just duplicate this one. We'll go to init, basically just to finish it off. And then here we will go clear glass, turn that down. Let's turn it to a high pass. input envelope follower, sidechain, and then we're going to receive that from the kick. So now every time the kick hits, it will trigger the threshold. And then we're going to attach that to the envelope follower. So now every time the kick hits, the bass ducks as well. I did this in the previous video. And then one thing I've just noticed when flicking back to the main bass patch, I have the sequencer here set to bipolar. That's not what I want. Make sure we change it to unipolar. So now we can see the cutoff starts here and then goes up. Remember the bipolar, the line, the midpoint is here. So it was starting below that and then going up. That's not at all what we want. So make sure it is unipolar. So now let's have a listen to how this sounds now. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll be back shortly with something else. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.